Hello, everybody. It's Donna Cravata, and we're back again for another Real 50 Over 50 interview. And today we have Dr. Tara Cousineau with us, and she is a clinical psychologist, a meditation teacher, and a lifelong learner on resilience, self-compassion, and healing. And she's a recovering perfectionist. She specializes in guiding individuals and organizations to cultivate inner worth, self-compassion, and authentic leadership. She's also a part-time staff psychologist at Harvard University's Counseling and Mental Health Services and brings expertise in mindfulness, mind-body medicine, and innovative psychological approaches. She's the author of a new book, her second book, The Perfectionist's Dilemma: Learn the Art of Self-Compassion and Become a Happy Achiever. I love that subtitle. The difference that Tara wants to make is to help people quiet their inner critic, trust themselves, and show up in the world with ease and purpose. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for finding me.
Yes, I know. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you do because I think that there are a lot of people walking around out there that don't even realize what they're doing to themselves.
Well, that is true, right? Self-awareness is always the first step, I say.
Yes, you have to know. And like when you are helping people deal with their inner perfectionist or just be kinder to themselves and gentler with themselves, what are some of the ways that you help them do that?
Donna, it's so interesting. First, what I hear is how mean people are to themselves in their own minds. So it's kind of hard to kind of go for the kindness and self-compassion right away. First is this discovery process of, well, what are the inner narratives? What are the themes? What are the patterns? I always invite people to start to kind of really personify their inner critic or inner critics, give it a little bit of a nickname, know when it's showing up, and really being curious. So when I'm first working with people, I'm just like, jot down your thoughts. What are the circumstances? So it could be giving a presentation. It could be having to talk to your in-laws. It could be, just getting through traffic. What is the narrative when you tune in and you notice it? So that's usually the very first step.
And in the book, you have exercises that people can do to kind of like work through this dialogue with themselves.
Yes. Well, the book is sort of a compilation of a set of skills that I've been working with for quite a number of years. I started doing an audio course on the Insight Timer on overcoming perfectionism using self-compassion. And then I started doing workshops for students and graduate students at Harvard. If you want to talk about imposter syndrome or perfectionism, it's just like, it's like up here. And I was like, oh my gosh, every person that I'm meeting is so hard on themselves. They don't even acknowledge or they minimize their achievements or their skills. They don't even know sort of the gifts that they're bringing to the world necessarily. I need to do something about this and I can't do it one-on-one.
Yeah.
Right? That's too slow. So I started these workshops on perfectionism. And then there was an offshoot that I'm actually doing right now called Befriending the Inner Critic, specifically for graduate students who are older and are closer to launching themselves into the world. And I came up with this method that I call evolve, because this really is about evolving. There's no quick fix. There's no mindset change. It's not like, oh yeah, if you want to change your mind, just change your mind. I mean, if people could do that, they would do that in a second, right? It's not that easy. So the evolve method really covers a host of tools, and I call them the Happy Achiever tools, and I describe them in the book. And they're a combination of self-awareness tools, grounding skills, sort of internal scripts, some energy medicine tools, including tapping. One thing that I've noticed with a lot of high achievers, not necessarily perfectionists, I mean, everything's on a spectrum, is that they're really actually disconnected from their bodies. Sometimes when I see someone come in the office, it's just like they're just head up, they've got things analyzed, they've overthought things. It's all, stuff in their minds, and they're really actually disconnected from their bodies. So a lot of work, and this is the body, more mind, body medicine piece of it is
Mhm.
how they can actually connect to themselves so they actually know what they're experiencing in the moment. And that can be really hard, especially for high achievers. And I'm one of them. I went off and got a PhD as my way of, you know, fixing all the ails in my family. you know, I mean, we go into these, these on these paths because we're always working things through. But part of it is being in control. Like I need to be in control of my world. It's so uncertain. If I don't do this, then this might happen. So when we're in control, a lot of the time, we actually have to dampen our feelings,
Mhm.
right, in order to kind of just strive and get through the world. So some of the work is actually not only noticing the inner narrative, which is obviously cognitive, but it's also like, well, where are you feeling that? If there's a harsh inner critic that's saying, oh, you're so stupid, how are you noticing that in and around your body? Are there feelings associated with it? What might they be?
Mm.
So sometimes I feel like I do a little remedial training on a feelings, sensation, emotion wheel, because a lot of high achievers really aren't connected that
Yeah,
way. And it's understandable because it's a survival strategy, essentially.
it is absolutely a survival strategy.
Yes.
It sounds like, some of Mark Brackett's work is in there.
Oh, yeah. Listen, we all need, I
Yeah.
feel like many people just were in environments. There wasn't really social emotional learning. I mean, if you grew up in my
No.
area, you might have had Mr. Rogers,
Yeah.
who was wonderful,
Yeah.
modern day mystic if there was one. But we are either, publicly sort of overexposure to things,
Mhm.
but internally really, constrained.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of, again, loosening, around the edges a
Like,
bit.
yeah, just kind of having a little tour of all the things that are going on, like, below here.
Yes, exactly. And, if there are any high achievers or perfectionists listening, I might ask you, I'm like, well, where do you feel things in your body? And usually people are like, oh my God, I've got TMJ, my neck's so tight, my shoulders are like
Mhm.
rocks or ropes here. I've got IBS, migraines, and then you start getting the whole list. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
wow, isn't that curious?
Yeah.
Um, you know, so the body's going to resource itself in whatever way it can. And often over time, when you're not aware that you've been operating on low grade stress for 25 years, your body's going to tell you one way or
Mhm.
the other.
Yeah. It sure does. Those cortisol, rushes,
Yeah, I mean,
they're
cortisol's energy,
unbelievable.
right? Your body's trying to get energy to keep
Yeah.
going and to keep, moving ahead. And at some point, it's just going to cause inflammation, right? Which is your body's first line of defense. So it's not uncommon that people will complain about sort of a stressor in their life, or they might have a goal that they're trying to achieve and they can't sleep, right? Or they're having multiple migraines that they've never had before. And so it is a little bit of a, see, I always say you have to kind of work from the outside in, but the work is actually the inside out.
Yeah, it really is, and, until you do that, you're just going to keep circling back and circling back and circling back until it actually gets your attention and your awareness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So back to your question about, what are the tools or the method, and evolve is an acronym. Psychologists love acronyms. It's easy to remember, but the first step is, embody the present moment. And asking people to meditate or take 5 minutes out of their day is almost, the hands go up. I can't do that. My mind's too busy. I'm not good
Mhm,
at that. I can't help but go to my to-do list, all of these kinds of things. And it doesn't have to be anything formal, but it is kind of taking these pauses throughout the day. I just say, really, you're trying to ping your nervous system, letting your nervous system know, oh, hey, I'm taking a moment of peace and quiet. And
yeah,
that's really helpful. And it's almost better than doing 25 minutes in the morning. It's better when you're in these transition times to take that just to slow down, reduce the stimulation, tune into what's happening.
mhm,
And then moving people to the actual, maybe the Mark Brackett side of things, which is, validate your feelings, learn how to name them, or, emotional agility, right? It's like
mhm,
Susan David's work. Like, when we start to
mhm,
actually have a wider vocabulary for our experiences, that actually helps build resilience. Otherwise, it's like I'm happy, mad, sad,
Yeah.
glad. That's such a narrow way of experiencing the world. But when you can actually expand um, your identification and description of it, things start to um, illuminate in a new way, really, for you. So V is validate your experiences, learn to name them, share them, say them out loud. And then what comes after that? Which is opening your heart. And this is where I really start trying to do some of that inner critic work. Once you start to validate your experiences and you realize, oh, I'm really mean to myself. I'm saying these awful things, or I know that if I don't keep moving, something bad will happen. We talked about that a little bit at before we started. Is we make these associations that make sense from a child's mind, maybe at 5 or 10, but not now. So
Yeah.
we have to kind of start to kind of open ourselves up, and that's starting to be, that's the beginning of self-compassion,
Mhm.
is identifying the inner critic. So I have this whole little scheme. I have these archetypes of inner critics that are so common. So I just tell people to show up in my office and bring their inner critic.
Mhm.
Whichever one seems to be, the present one at the moment. Sometimes I call it your plus one. I'm like, who's your plus one this week? Is it the inner judge? Is it the inner detective?
I love that.
You know, so that's like the first part of the steps, and then we go into actually learning how to relate to those inner critics or those thoughts or patterns in a different way rather than trying to get rid of them. And then there's some values work, because my feeling is, and I think a lot of people write about this, Brene Brown certainly does, is values light your way. So when you can identify what's really important to you in your life right now, and when you can identify a good 3 to 5
Mhm.
core values, it really helps with decision making.
It absolutely does. And what I have learned too, because I had to go through a lot of the things that you're talking about, um, when you can align your values with the people that are in your life, whether they're personal or professional relationships, it makes such a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes I think the hardest thing, especially for um, in the age group that I tend to work with, which is late 20s, 30s and early 40s, is you sometimes have to let go of earlier relationships or friendships that aren't serving you in any way,
Yeah.
but there's parts of us that are very loyal. And it's hard to say, I've outgrown this, or my needs are different now, or my interests are different now. And, that can be tricky for
Yeah,
people.
and that really hits in that age category because you're really changing at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of evolution happening then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you have to, otherwise you stay stuck.
Yes. And what's so interesting in the area that I work, in terms of just even location, there's just such a huge international community.
Mhm.
And what I find is it doesn't matter where you're from, your age, your experiences in life. We harbor these inner critics. They're conditioned early on. And it's one of the reasons why I like doing workshops in groups, because often we're just really alone with our own experiences. God forbid that we share or expose ourselves. But when other people hear, like, oh, you say that to you? I totally relate. It actually starts to disarm a little bit, that inner critic. And you see, like, oh, they're really, because inner critics are protective.
Mhm.
Ultimately, and I say, people say, well, what's the definition of perfectionism? I said, well, I have a definition, but ultimately, perfectionism or any striving that's compulsive is protection. And if you can see it as like, oh, how is this element or this behavior, this attitude protecting me, and from what? Um, it's a different way. It's kind of like flipping the script rather than thinking, like being so identified with it as a problem, let's say. That can be really helpful too. So values is important in that regard, and values also change, right,
Yeah,
depending on where you are in your life. So it's always kind of good
absolutely.
to do, like, a check-in every few years.
Yeah. I mean,
on
I
them.
I was trained in Brené Brown's Dare to Lead
Oh, me
methodology.
too. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so part of the work that I do with my clients is I
Yeah.
take them through her values exercise. And we do it more from the perspective of understanding your own values so you can connect with clients that have similar values. And, so I was doing this values work with people. I've done it for myself. And
Hmm.
a friend of mine asked me to go through her boundaries workshop that she created. So I was like, okay. And then she's like, you have to do the boundaries exercise. I mean, the values exercise. I said, I don't want to. I do this all the time. And she goes, no, just do it. And I did it. And my values were totally changed from what they were because I had made so many changes in my life and my business and everything that I was doing. And that was one of the most surprising things that ever happened to me because I didn't see it coming.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are always evolving. I think that's why I
Yeah.
really like that acronym. And I love Brene Brown's work too, from the daring way
Hmm.
approach. I did the therapeutic clinical version of that. You might have done the leadership version of that.
Hmm.
And I think it's a relief when people realize, oh, this is where I am now in this phase of
Yeah.
my life, and this is what's important to me now. And in 5 years, or when you finish your PhD or you get your first job, it could really change. I also like in her values, I was actually looking at different values lists, is that she really actually brings in relationships,
Yeah.
family, parenting, friendships. You know, sometimes we think of values as being these sort of more abstract things, but they're actually really close to home often.
Yeah. And I appreciate the way that she encourages you to get it down to two
Yes.
because then the fluff kind of peels away
Yes,
and
that's true.
you get to the real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if your listeners know how that works, but when you get those values lists, there's an A to Z list. There could be a
Mhm,
hundred items on there, and you're like circling them. You're like, oh, this is important to me, and this is important to me. And then the exercise is like, okay, so now you've got 20, cut
mhm,
that in half,
mhm.
right? Just take a minute, cut it in half, right? And then, oh, okay, so now you've got 10.
Mhm.
Yeah, cut that list in half, right?
Yeah,
Until you just kind of whittle it down. And that is actually a really nice pruning exercise in a way to kind of get to where you're at right now at this moment in
yeah,
your
because
life.
I mean, it shows you also like how values are related to each other because you realize that oh, there's actually a system here. Like I actually have these two core values, and these other values kind
Yeah.
of that they reside underneath those two core values. And
Yes.
I always find that when I'm doing it for myself or, helping somebody else to go through the process, I love to look for that moment when they realize, oh, I can have them all, but I just need to reorganize them a bit. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's this level of comfort comes over them that they can be all of these things.
Yeah, it's true. And the way that I weave this in now is as people identify their inner critical voices. So let's say there's a judge or maybe the nitpicker or a neatnik. Like I definitely have a neatnik in me, and that can totally distract me from doing things that I need to do. But when you start to understand that this pattern, these inner critical narratives, or sometimes people like this algorithm, um, is trying to serve you in some way. Often it's to motivate you to keep you on track, or it's to protect you from, say, reputation damage or being criticized or rejected in some way. And you can understand that that's the impulse for that inner critical voice. You can ask yourself, well, if this inner critic didn't have to do this job so well, what would it do instead?
Mm,
And that often is this sort of aha moment where like a value might come in. Well, I would play more. I would travel. I would do, I would allow myself to relax and spend more time with friends. And I think that it's such a core thing because if we weren't burdened with ththese pressures that the inner critical voices, put on us, and they were freed up for their natural gifts, and values, oh my gosh, life
yeah.
would be really different. And so that's part of the discovery process that I help people work through, and it's often so liberating. I would say.
It is. I mean, I remember when I had to learn that. And at first, I just didn't like the words made sense in my head, but it couldn't get past my head. And
Yes.
it
Yeah.
took a while for that to settle in and realize that, I didn't have to do things. And when I changed it to, asking if I wanted to, or, you know, inquiring if it was a have to or a get to,
Hmm.
um, you know,
Yeah.
it's just it's amazing how like one small shift of the way you think about something can change so many things in your life.
Yes, and when you can connect it to your body,
Yeah,
your feelings and the sensations, you actually start to experience the shift
yeah,
viscerally, not
yeah.
just cognitively.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that used to happen to me is I worked in a law firm for 25 years before I started my business, and it was very high pressure. And,
Hmm.
I worked crazy hours all the time for years, for decades. I worked crazy hours. And then, like, I would go into this spin, like, and I would feel myself just like lurch off the cliff and go into this spin, and I didn't know how to stop it. And learning how to stop that, to pause when I was at that cliff and realize that I had a choice, that I
Yeah.
can go leaping off the cliff or I can take 2 steps back. That was one of the most defining moments of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you realize also, I actually have control over this.
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah,
have to take over me in that moment. Yeah. The nervous system work, I think, is so key, and it's slow work. And so, like with high achievers or perfection, they have no patience for that.
no patience.
And so there's this sort of work on, every day, so, there's a term also in sort of the self-help, habit stacking, like,
Mhm,
because people are like, oh, time is a commodity, right? I don't have time. I'm like, okay. Are you in the carpool lane picking up your kids, or
mhm,
on the train, or, walking to work? Like, there's all of these little transition moments in the day. Use that.
mhm,
Making a cup of coffee. Most people make a cup of tea or coffee every single day. Can you use those 3 minutes
mhm.
to feel your feet on the floor, relax your shoulders, take some deep belly breaths? Try it.
Yeah,
And, it's like kind of like, it is like that metaphor of, strengthening a muscle. You have to do it repeatedly.
mhm,
And even if you're not feeling the benefit just yet, you will after
mhm.
3 or 4 weeks.
Well, those high achievers need to have evidence that it's worth their time.
I know. So I bring in a lot of research and evidence if they ask for it. I mean, what I'm so happy about, because I've been in my career quite a long time now, is, when I was starting out, mindfulness was a joke.
Yeah.
Even my dissertation chair said, "Oh, you're into that stuff." He
Mhm.
basically thought I was aloof.
Yeah.
And I remember doing a training with John Kabat-Zinn. I mean, I think I was like 26 years old, and now the research, I mean, my mind body training programs are around the globe. There are thousands of studies on the benefits of mindfulness practice in whatever way. And often it's the small little moments that are actually most effective, because they're the easiest to do and sustain over the long term. So the proof is there. I mean, there's been tons of meta-analyses, about the effectiveness. And now the same with self-compassion. So
Mhm,
self-compassion came like 15 years later, and Dr. Cousineau, who started the whole
mhm.
research area here, um, everyone's adding now, self-compassion into a lot of their psychological studies. And sure enough, I'm like, you know what? There's nothing bad about it. Like, we should
No.
all be doing it more often, short little spurts, multiple times a day.
Mhm.
Taking a little bit of a self-compassion break, which, she just, demonstrates it's so easy. It's
Yeah.
being mindful in the moment without judging yourself. Like, maybe it's an ouch moment, knowing that you're not alone with this experience. This is a nervous system response, for goodness sake, to something that might be challenging, reminding yourself that this is a human experience. And
Mhm.
then, directing some sort of kindness or encouragement to yourself in that moment. And so we can practice those. You can put a hand on the heart which is bonus, because then after 30 seconds, you start to feel the warmth and you're releasing some oxytocin in your brain, right? And you start really having the physiological benefits of a self-compassion break. So there's so many little things that we can do that don't require it being on a to-do list.
Yeah. Yeah. And working them in to, how you operate throughout the day, because none of this is one and done.
Exactly. But as you practice these states, they can turn into traits over time, right? So that you become more resilient, because all of a sudden you've been able to offset the negativity bias, which we all have. We can't help it that our brains do that. But we can start to make our brains, such as by this little sort of rewiring, so that we're cultivating more of a positivity bias. So you might have that first, pang of distress, but immediately you can, intervene in that moment. Oh, here we are again. Oh, that's my little part. Like I have a little part I call Scarlet. I was a temper tantrum kid. Scarlet comes up every once in a while in my life. All I have to do is watch the news, for goodness sake. And instead of getting mad at everybody in the world, I can just say, okay, yeah, this is your little sort of, little Miss Justice girl coming forward, and it's understandable given what's going on. And, and then I just have to kind of calm myself down. So we can start to work with our parts, if you will, in much kinder, understanding ways.
Yeah. And the building of the resilience is such a critical piece of this, because it's like every time it's a scale. And every time, like, you can heal a little something with a little piece of resilience that you could bring into the fold, it just puts that much more balance on the resilience side.
Yeah, absolutely. Practice,
It's
practice.
practice. I mean, for a client a couple of years ago, I was doing some research and I learned of the ACEs study.
Oh, yes.
That was another life-altering moment.
I wrote about that in my first book, The Kindness Cure.
Mhm.
And these are these really difficult challenges that you might have as a kid,
Yeah,
and they affect you, and they can affect longevity.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you take them with you if they're not healed in childhood. And it was so eye-opening. And I was working with a client at the time that was a nonprofit mental health agency for children, and I was invited to work with them, to work directly with Dr. Nadine Burke
Oh,
Harris's
yes.
to bring the ACEs study into pediatric evaluations throughout the state of California, and it
Yeah,
was
wonderful.
very rewarding work.
Yeah. And I do think that when people do that little checklist, you can find it online. And it's often related to traumatic events, or having an alcoholic parent, or a parent in prison, or there's just been some sort of really disruptor,
Mhm.
and someone realizes that they've got 2 or 3 or 4. It helps to make sense of how their mind body system had to respond to those difficult circumstances. And while you couldn't help what happened back then, or didn't even know how to heal yourself, it is something that you can do now with that kind of understanding, and the parts that actually are still carrying those burdens forward.
Yeah, it is. It is like it's almost like an X-ray.
Yeah.
You see the parts that need a little love.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Or a lot of love. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and
call that.
they weren't nurtured. They were not
Right.
nurtured.
Right, right. And so there's the importance of being able to have, healthy relationships,
Mhm.
find healthier relationships, like just keep gravitating to like, okay, well, this is a little bit 10% healthier than what I had before. Maybe this is another 10, you keep moving forward, but you can also do that work for yourself. And sometimes we call that spiritual reparenting, in
Mhm.
a way, is that you become the parent or the caregiver that you needed for yourself, or for those quote unquote younger parts that are still in your, you know, system.
She's
Oh,
with
Ren.
me every day
Oh,
when I
sweet.
remember that I need a little reparenting. I've had her
Yes.
since I was, like, 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so sweet. One of the things that I find often is very moving for people who might have a harder time understanding that they have these algorithms or these parts, or they're resisting it in some way, is I just say, listen, I want you to find a photograph of yourself at age 6 or 10, or it could be a school photograph, and put it on your mantle or make it a screensaver on your iPhone. And every day, I want you to look at that and just direct some kind of kindness or understanding, give it a wink, and just know, so that you can relate to that part of yourself. And people often will tear up or they'll cry. Or I had somebody recently come back with 2 different photos at 2 different stages in her life. I'm like, great, because those parts of you had to carry different burdens. The stressors at 6 were different than the stressors at 10. And so we'll see how that works for her. But I actually had one that had like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. She had this little like across her mantle. I'm like, thank you. Just practice that. And it gets you out of that. There's something wrong with me. I'm forever marred. I'm scarred. I can't get through this. But to be able to kind of give yourself that kindness and appreciation for getting you through some really hard moments.
Yeah, and to not blame yourself for
Exactly.
things that you have absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
And, that's so freeing and makes the space for you to be able to do the real work of healing and growing and knitting the pieces back together in an entirely different way.
Yes.
Well, I cannot believe that we have spoken for a half an hour already. This has been amazing. I just have been very excited to meet you because you're one of the few people in this community that I have not met yet, and have this conversation. And I'm sure that this will be helpful to so many people. And, here is Tara's website. Please check out her books and the work that she's doing. And I like to wrap up these interviews asking for a wisdom bomb, even though you've just given us like an entire arsenal of positive wisdom bombs.
Well, it's so funny because you just use the word knitting, and you show your little Raggedy Ann. So this is a little energy medicine tool. It comes from Donna Eden Energy Medicine. And often we need to kind of, in a way of sort of that spiritual reparenting, we need to actually reconnect to ourselves. So there's this beautiful little, think of it as a self-compassion exercise of just almost like doing like a little infinity circle with your fingers over your heart, and you're stitching your own aura back to yourself. Like you're just, it's this really kind, gentle way of focusing on your heart area, breathing to it. Give yourself some sort of kind word or affirmation like, I'm here for you, I've got you. You can do it at night. Like it's often so actually calming to do that at night. And again, it helps release some oxytocin to kind of get those sort of good love cuddle hormones going. So
That's a good one.
yeah,
That is
it's
a good
sweet.
one. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for spending some time today. And if anybody's watching on the replay, if you've got questions or comments, please tag us and we'll keep the conversation going. And again, like head on over to Tara's website, see what she's got going on there. She's doing magic in the world.
Oh, Donna, thank you for including me in your circle. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome to be here. Okay, we will be back next week with more. So we've got interviews booked all the way into October now, and keep bringing you these incredible women and their stories.